Hey, thanks, Kathy. Well, good morning. As Kathy said, my name is Steve Estes. I'm the County Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources here in Taylor County. It's so good to be here. So good to see a really full room. And all of you come out for our Gardening in West Texas program this morning. Now, gardening in West Texas, it's not easy, is it? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. The room would be empty if we did this program. If it was easy to grow things in our area, you certainly wouldn't have a need to come here. Okay, so we're going to start from the ground up, literally, this morning. We're going to start with soils. Then we're going to kind of move into how you can fix your soils, and then move into what you can grow here. So I'm going to start off with soils. We're going to kind of give you an overview. Now, soil can get very complicated, can get very scientific, and we're not going to dive that deep into it. We're just going to try to give you the information that really basic, that would help you and need to understand what your soil is like. And I can guarantee you, I don't know how many's in the room, but I can guarantee that nearly all of you have different types, or let's say variations in the soil from person to person or resident to resident. Now, I would assume many of you are out here from in Abilene. Raise your hand if you live here in the city limits, and raise your hand if you're outside the city limits. Raise your hand if you're outside of Taylor County. Another county? Okay, so we got variation from around. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's start off. What is it? Is it soil or dirt? What? The way I look at it is dirt's dirt, but soil has all the components to support life and support growth. Okay, so what does it need? So we need air in the soil. We need a mixture of water. It's got to be water. Out here we have the droughts, and it certainly, when it doesn't rain or it's dry, it doesn't grow. Supports that. The water is a big component. Minerals and then organic materials. When it has all that, those proportions in it, it becomes soil and it can support life. All right, now, what is soil? Does it look like? If we look at it under a microscope, soil is basically, I like to think of it as kind of like little tiny microscopic rocks, in a sense. And they can take on different shapes, and we'll talk a little bit of that here in a minute. But you put it together, and some are smaller than others, and then that makes them more dense or porous, if you will. And then, so you let you have water down in between them. You have some air in there, and you can see where the roots go in between these. So these three examples here. This would be one of saturation, be totally water around your soil particles. This would be, you have some water and air. This is what would be really good. And then in this, if you have very little water and a lot of air, then you get into wilting points. And that's where you've seen in the last few years when we've had this drought going on, when your plants wilt in the summertime with lack of water. Okay, so if you look to the soil, we have our topsoil at the top, and then we get into what we call subsoil, and then we get down to soft bedrock and then bedrock. That's basically the layers. Now, depending on where you live, the depth of this can vary. In some areas, we have a good deep topsoil layer before we get to our subsoil. Some areas, it may just be a few inches before you get down into some of your subsoil, and then even down into rock. So this kind of gives you a good example of that. You have topsoil up here, it has organic material, things mixed in, then you get into some subsoil, then you get into harder, either a packed clay, hard pan layer, or then from there on. So your root zone is mainly up in here for what you're growing. And depends on how deep this is how deep your roots can go and they can permeate. Now I'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So any direction that you drive around Abilene, you're going to see different colors of soil. You're going to see different types of soil. You go out west towards Merkel, you're going to see more of like the red clay. If you go south of Abilene, you get into the hills out here. We have more rocks. It's called the Edwards Plateau, or it's part of the Edwards Plateau out there. You get down to Tuscola area, you're going to see a little darker soil. Or if you drive north in the Hawley area, you get north of Hawley, you get into real sandy soils, or a strip there, and then it gets into up around Anson, you get back more red soil, and then further north and around Stanford, you'll get a darker soil. So, what does that mean? Variation of what's in the soil, the mineral content, how the soil how it evolved over thousands of years, and then also organic matter plays a role in that as well. So a quick map, look at it here. Taylor County, we are right here, and you can see where with this is considered the rolling plains. The purple is considered Edwards Plateau, which is part of down in what we call the hill country. And you can see how we vary so much there in Taylor County, but then within that we vary a lot more too. So back to the soil texture. Remember I said, like, think of it as like little bitty rocks. Sand being the biggest. So if it was pure sand, this would be the kind of size of the sand itself. This is very coarse, 2 to 1 millimeter, and then you can go all the way down to fine sands. Then we have silt, and we have clay. And you can kind of break soil down into those components, but it's basically by size. We have clay loam, and then sandy loam. And basically, when you hear the word loam, that's kind of a mixture where we have sand and clay together. We make a sandy loam. If we have like some silt and clay together, then we have a silty clay loam. So this is kind of just don't expect you to really read too much into this, but this is kind of the textural triangle, how it all fits in the different sizes. So think of it as sizes. Okay, how do you know what you have? So you can do a test. You can actually send a sample down to the soil testing lab, which we'll talk about in this presentation. Now, and one of the tests they can run is a textural analysis. They can tell you what you have. How much clay do you have? How much sand do you have? How much silt do you have? Or you can also do kind of a home test. So you can get you a mason jar like this, fill it about half full of dirt, and then fill it with water, shake it up, and then set it down and let it sit there on the cabinet for 3 or 4 days or a week. That soil will settle out, and you will see, maybe it's kind of hard for you to see there's little different colors in there and strips. So that's settling out, like what this picture up here, and basically giving your sand and your silt and your clay content of what that soil was. So it's kind of a little fun thing to do. And if you just curious, maybe on a little science experiment at home. But these are some that our Master Gardener training class that's going right now that they did from their landscapes, and they learned about this Thursday night. Actually, so the way it settles out, like this jar here, it's mostly sand. So this is all the sand that's settled out down here at the bottom. They have a little bit of silt and a little bit of clay on top. This is what we call loam. Remember I talked about the mixture, you've got kind of balance. You've got 10 to 30% clay up here, you got 30% silt, and then 25 to 50% sand at the bottom. And this is a heavy clay soil, where a lot of your clay would settle out there on the top, a little bit of silt, a little bit of sand there at the bottom. So that's kind of a fun thing that you could do at home to see what the analysis of your soil is. Okay, so have you ever dug in the dirt? How many when you were kids you get out there and you dug in the dirt, played in the dirt? I know I did. Some of us still do. And if you take the soil or the dirt and you put your hand, you squeeze it, especially when it has a little bit of moisture to it, and then does it kind of stick together or does it kind of fall apart? That's one way you can tell what kind of structure you have. So like on this side, this is kind of a really sticky looking clay that would stick together. And then this right here has more air and nutrients and roots and organic material and stuff in it. Well, it kind of falls back apart. Which one do you think kind of would grow better? Grow with the best plant? So they plant on this side, right? Yeah. All right. So why is that? It has other things in it that kind of breaks it apart. It doesn't get compacted as much as like this does. So, and that's something you're going to learn a little bit here in a minute. If you have soil that really compacts and a heavy clay soil, you're going to learn how to fix it. Or if you have a little sandy soil, you'll have to learn how to fix it. So the ideal soil size, and then you need particles with good air and place for water to get and everything, and your roots can penetrate through it. You want it kind of separated apart. The compacted soil, it's too hard and thick. So how do we get compacted soil? Well, some of the soil, some of you may have soil that feels like this floor, especially when it's dry. So if you plant a seed in that, and that seed germinates, it's going to try to push down a root, and then it's going to hit a level that it can't go anywhere. And also, if it's compacted on the top, it may not be able to push through the top. So we really have to break it up. And our next speaker is going to talk about that as far as breaking it up, breaking it open, and then how much you can put in there to keep it where it's soft and it can push through. Okay, effects of compaction itself. Where we have compacted soil, kind of like this floor here, our root zone is very limited. So this is high compaction. You can see there's very little roots here. It couldn't push down in there. This is medium compaction. This is low compaction. This is something like a plant, if you had a layer underneath you, just a couple inches of topsoil that the roots can't push through down any further. This was actually a cotton plant, actually in a cotton field, where it couldn't push on down, and it had to push out to the side because it hit that hard layer. Too much compaction. Then we also have permeability, or what we call permeability. So the more compacted, or the more those particles, we talk about the soil, the more they're closer together, and they kind of stick together, there's less room in between them. And that means they hold water really well, right? So when it rains, water will stand for a longer period of time. You hear the term, when you're looking at plants or trees or what you want to plant, you read or you hear a term about it needs well-drained soils. Some plants will say that, right? Well, that's what that means. If you have soil that water will sit after a rain, and it'll sit there for a long time, and it won't leach on through or won't drain on out underneath the ground, then that's not well drained. The permeability of that is not very good. So you get situations like this farmer who got stuck in his field trying to run a sprayer. And then in a situation like that turns into a situation like this, where more farmers who go out there and decide they could pull the first one out and they can get it out and they keep working. So that kind of soil there is not very well drained, right? Okay, so really quickly on texture, and when you put water in, either sandy soil, water moves through sand very quickly. Loam, it's a little bit kind of in the middle, and then you have your clay soil, then it kind of holds at the top. This is kind of exhibits that same thing. On a very sandy soil, water will not move outward very much. It'll go straight down. If it's a heavier clay soil, it'll kind of spread out and slowly go down. Just cool microscopic pictures of kind of what sand and clay look like. Really, really up close if you ever want to know. Your water holding capacity of the different types. You have sand, the permeability is really high, but the water retention is very low. Loam is kind of in the middle. Remember, that's kind of a mixture. Loam, the medium, that's silt and clay, and low permeability. That means that water can't really move through it very fast at all, so they have a high water retention. So this is another good example of kind of root structure of two different plants in varying soils. This one, it couldn't. The roots could not move. It's a more compacted soil. This one they could. So soil pH. Let's move on. So we're moving through this pretty quickly. In Taylor County, right here in our area, we are primarily right around neutral. Most of ours are then slightly alkaline, so we're a little bit above 7 or a little bit above. Most of the soil samples that I've seen or soil tests taken in our area are usually right at 7 to 7.5. I've seen maybe as high as 7.7. Some of y'all, have y'all seen, John, have y'all seen higher than like a 7.7 for right around our area?
Right around here, I don't know, but I know west, if you start heading west, it starts going out.
Yeah. So, and if you think about this, where we're at in Abilene, if we go west, the soils get more alkaline. If you go east, they're going to get more acidic. So we get lower pH east of here. We're fortunate to be right in here, right around 7. I have seen some high 6s, and that's been mainly north of here, northwest here in some sandier soils. But for the most part, keep in mind that's kind of about where we're at. So we're good. We're good. Ideal for growing plants soil-wise. Now, what does the soil have to do with fertility and your nutrients and the pH and how plants can access those? So If you look, we are very slightly alkaline. So right through here is our nitrogen. Our plants can utilize nitrogen good, can utilize phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium good. And then they get into here, iron we have a little bit of trouble taking up. The pH of the soil affects the ability of the plant to be able to use these nutrients. So if you get more acidic soil, plants can utilize iron better, but they have a harder time utilizing these nutrients. So that makes sense? Yes.
So if you're to grow a hydrangea, what color would the blooms be?
What's that?
If you're to grow a hydrangea, what color would the blooms be?
What color would the blooms be?
The pink or the blue?
I don't know. It'd be depend on as far as I don't know. John, the question is: if you grow a hydrangea, what color would the blooms be?
It would go to the more alkaline.
More alkaline, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, just curious.
Yeah. I mean,
It probably end up sort of like.
Yeah.
well, I mean, and that's a good question because we're here, we're right on the bubble. I guess it depends on what the direction it would go. So, again, where we're at right here, we usually don't have too much trouble with our plants using this. We get into some trouble with some of these macronutrients with being able to access those. And we'll talk a little more about that a little later. All right, optimum rates for our vegetable crops here. Asparagus, beets, cabbage, we're good. Remember, we're right in this area right here. We can grow those. Sweet corn, pumpkins, tomatoes, we're still good. But if you were thinking about growing blueberries or strawberries here, strawberries, we're getting close. Strawberries need a little slightly acidic soil, but blueberries need really acidic soil. So blueberries really won't work here in our area.
What about fertilizing them with some fertilizer?
Well, you would need to make your soil a further more acidic soil. So you'd have to, and that's what we're going to do in kind of the next. John, are you going to get into any of that about as far as maybe changing pH in your presentation?
No, not really.
Okay.
You're right.
So you kind of really need to push the pH down here. Okay, so the law of the minimum. Growth is controlled by the amount of nutrients available, not by the amount of nutrients available, but by the most limiting single nutrient. So what that means is not what you have available, what you're giving your plant, but what is the single most limiting factor would control whether you would get your good growth or not. So think of this barrel here. If you were filling it up with water and you had different height, so each one of these slats is maybe your different nutrients or everything that a plant needs, right? And some you have more of than others. When you were filling up with water, where's the water going to start running out? Where the lowest slat is, basically. So whatever the most limiting thing is about as full as you're going to get that barrel. So about your plant's only going to do as good as whatever the most limiting thing is. Nitrogen may be your most limiting factor. Simply, that's usually what is around here. It's either water, and then the next thing will be nitrogen, because nitrogen we lose very quickly, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But being in West Texas, it's always usually dry, so water is our biggest limiting factor, and then we'll get into usually like nitrogen or other things. But whatever your most limiting factor is, that's where your holdup's going to be. So keep that in mind. All right, so real quickly, let's run through. Let's get into fertilization and fertility, nutrients, those types of things. Main thing, this is a big three: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Okay, so this lawn, this picture is kind of a little darker in here. This lawn right here looks really good, dark and green. This one's looks more yellow. It's got a few kind of green spots in it. This one's been fertilized, and this one has not. And you can kind of see a difference there. This one's struggling. It has some limiting factor there, or factors. So, but nitrogen is good. Nitrogen promotes growth. Real rapid growth, but sometimes there's problems with putting too much of it down. We have a reduced root growth because it makes the plant want to shoot up and not necessarily down. So it takes, you get a lot of good green response, a lot of good growth, but you have also some other caveats that come with it, like your reduced root. It takes a little more water in a sense that the plant's growing fast and doesn't have as good a big root zone, so you got to keep watering it. Reduced cold tolerance, thatch accumulation, those types of things. Phosphorus. Phosphorus, the main thing I want you to focus in on are these two things right here. And I'm going to talk a little more here in a second about how it's very immobile. It doesn't leach or volatilize. Okay. And then the function of the plant stimulates early growth and root formation. So phosphorus is good for building a good root system. Whether it be your lawn, your turf grass, we need the phosphorus to promote good root system and get establishment very early. Now, the bad thing about, let me go back to nitrogen, of course, don't mention it here on any of the slides. Nitrogen in the soil, once you apply it, will leach through the soil as fast as, say, water will take. The roots will use it up, and they can use it up quickly, or if you're watering or we get a big rain, it'll push the soil. If your soil's pretty permeable, that nitrogen will move through. And sometimes it'll move on down and get past the root zone where the roots can't pick it up. Phosphorus does not do that. Phosphorus kind of stays in the top 2 or 3 inches of soil. It'll stay right there unless it's used up. Okay? All right, so a little phosphorus issues here. This one would be kind of like in this grain sorghum field. There's a strip here in this research trial that was limiting on the phosphorus where it basically didn't help that grain sorghum promote the seed heads and the growth. Too much phosphorus will lead to a zinc deficiency. Basically what that means is when we have too much phosphorus in the top 2 or 3 inches of soil, it will create an issue where the plant can't take up zinc and iron. So now your plant has a zinc and iron deficiency because you have too much phosphorus there. And then it promotes, maturity, basically, is what your phosphorus, think of it as on that end. And then we have potassium as well. It doesn't leach or volatilize either. It's like the phosphorus, it doesn't move. So remember, nitrogen moves quickly through the soil. It's either used quickly or moves quickly through the soil. Phosphorus and potassium stick around, unless they're used. A couple other, as far as some nutrient deficiency looks. Now, you borrowed these slides from Dr. Jake Maurer. He's one of our soil scientists and soil specialists down at Texas A&M. One thing that I'll caution you on some of these pictures is you see this kind of warping of the leaf. Sometimes that can also be a same symptom as like a herbicide damage, like an auxin-based herbicide, like 2,4-D or dicamba. It will cause a leaf to kind of do similar things. So sometimes I want to caution you about if you were to see that in a vegetable garden and think, oh, I have a fertility issue, it may also be a herbicide issue too. Okay, so secondary plants, you got calcium, magnesium, sulfur. We won't spend much time on these and are essential micronutrients, zinc and iron and those types of things. A lot of that comes from your organic matter. Increasing soil pH decreases the micronutrient availability. Keep that in mind. The higher we go, which remember we're a little over 7, we're more alkaline. So in some cases, the more alkaline we get, we can limit some of the micronutrients that we can use. Iron chlorosis. This is just kind of in a trial down at Texas A&M where they had iron chlorosis. You can see these where they're yellowing here. This is kind of what manganese, but also iron is very similar, where you'll see really dark veins in the leaf, and the rest of the leaf will turn yellow. You do see something like this. This is would be herbicide related. You know that you have a fertility issue. You have different types of roots. Keep in mind you have tap roots. You have a fibrous root system. Some plants have bulbs. Now let's get into fertilizer. So where are we at on time? So we're good. Okay, so need to do a soil test to kind of really know what you have there. And I'm going to explain a little bit or kind of piece that together on why that's really critical, especially for the phosphorus issue here in a minute. So need to use it. You always hear about using fertilizer properly. You want to make sure that you measure it out you're putting the right amount down. You're not putting too much. Is kind of the big issue there. Then we have different types of fertilizer. We have single nutrient fertilizers and we have multi-nutrient fertilizers. Our simple fertilizers, it could be just nitrogen, or just phosphorus, or just potassium. And multi-nutrient, that's the ones that you see that'll have a 3-number system to it. It has all 3 of those main nutrients in it. So, like this one's a 15, 5, 10. The first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, and the third number is potassium. So basically what this is this will be able to list on the label, and it'll give you, it's a ratio. So like the ratio of a 15, 5, 10 is a 3, 1, 2. So I always think of it as kind of, it's 3 parts nitrogen, one part phosphorus, and 2 parts potassium. You'll see that on the label. It'll be like this. Look, this is a 20, 10, 20. It tells you how much the percentages is in here, and then also the sources of the nutrients as well. Okay, so soil samples. If you have a lawn or you have a garden, and we see this quite a bit, and back to the nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium issue and about it moving through, like I mentioned earlier. If you're putting fertilizer, how many of you regularly fertilize your lawn? Okay, well, maybe we're in good shape then. So, we say kind of rule of thumb, you want to fertilize your lawn about every 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes you can say rule of thumb, do it around the major holidays. Maybe put out first application around Easter, maybe another time around Memorial Day, 4th of July, and then Labor Day. And if you're doing that, and there are a lot of folks that do that, one thing I was caution you on is, what fertilizer you're using. Do a soil sample, see what your lawn needs, and not necessarily just put the fertilizer out just because it's time. And if you do a balanced fertilizer, kind of like we were showing here, sometimes your phosphorus and your potassium will build up in that top 2 or 3 inches of soil. And then later on, you'll have an issue with your plants not being able to utilize those nutrients, and then they bind up like iron and zinc, and they can't use those. So one thing we see especially here in town, if somebody does a soil sample, they'll find that they have really high phosphorus and potassium, but they're really low on nitrogen. Remember, nitrogen, I said, goes really quickly through the soil, and it's used up real quickly. Sometimes all you need is just put a nitrogen down, and not put anything else down. So that's a little soapbox spill on that, but we'll move into taking your soil samples. So I'd encourage you to do soil samples, whether it's in a garden, flower bed, lawn, maybe you're growing crops, maybe you have a wheat field out there, or cotton. Yes, ma'am.
So on unfertilized ground around the city, do you see a lot of difference in the NPK?
On unfertilized ground, yes, and it would be similar to like even out in our range and pastures. You take a soil sample out there, and you'll usually see, again, low nitrogen, but then phosphorus and potassium is usually at a decent level. Those will kind of stay fairly decent. Sometimes a little low. I've seen some, depending on the soil itself, where everything's low. But I've never seen even one in a situation like what you're saying, that you have anything high, for example.
Okay.
Now, when I talk to farmers and ranchers about doing soil samples in their pastures, I also tell them that depending on the time of year you take those soil samples, you will have different results as far as your nitrogen level goes. A good example would be if you were taking a soil sample now or a little earlier, like in the wintertime, you're going to have a little higher nitrogen level, and you're going to feel like I've got to do nitrogen. But once the plants green up, or whatever grass is there, natives or whatnot are growing, they're going to use that nitrogen through the year. So if you take that soil sample this summer or this fall, your nitrogen level is going to be really low. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And then it's kind of replenished through organic matter and things over the wintertime and the dormant season. So get out there and take soil tests. You can use a shovel, a spade. This is a soil probe. You can use as well, like in this picture, he's spraying a little non-stick spray on it, and you can push this down in the soil, and it's going to pull a It's got a little core that will pull up here that you can take out. You want to take a soil sample in the top 6 inches of your soil, 6 to 8 inches. That's where your main root zone is for whatever you're growing. If you're growing other plants that have a deeper root system, you might want to take samples even further down. But it's going to vary too. Remember, you have more organic matter up close to the top of your soil than you do a little further down. So if you were to take a sample from up here and then go down here, those two could be different. Down here you may have a little more nitrogen, deeper, but less phosphorus and potassium. So sometimes don't get too deep and don't mix that as much, because your result may be a little varied on what your soil really needs. Basically look at it as what's your root zone, how deep your root zone is, and what do you need for that root zone. Okay. So here's just pictures of this soil probe like I had here. This guy's sticking it in the soil, pull them out, see the little cores there, and you'll pull those out and you put them in a bag. We have soil sample bags. We provide them here at our office at no charge. You can pick them up. We have some in the back here actually that you can leave here today if you want to take some to do some soil samples. Here's the bag. You would open it up. It takes about a pint of soil. There's a fill line here. You want to fill it up there. So here's what the ideal way to do this is you want to sample in a big area. Let's say you have a small garden, for example, and that garden isn't very large. Let's say it's maybe a third of the size of this room. You would want to take samples in multiple places. And usually what I tell folks is take those and put them in a bucket and then mix them up real good and then pull your sample out and put it in a bag, because that makes it more representative of the whole area. You wouldn't want to go out and just pull a sample in one specific spot and then send it in, because that may really throw up. It may not be representative of everything around it. That could have been where the neighbor's dog come by and peed on it, and that's really going to throw off your test, right? So, it just so happened that's where you pull the sample. But anyhow, that's just a funny joke. But you want to take several samples around, mix them together in a bucket, put them in your bag, and then send it off. If you're doing in different areas, let's say you're doing vegetable garden in the backyard, you have some flower beds out front, or your lawn in the front or backyard, you'd want to do multiple samples probably. Then you can label those and as such and send them in. Here's what your soil test will come back looking like from the lab down at College Station. You'll see they put it in a nice readable format with a little graph. You can say this is critical level here, so you just kind of give you a benchmark of, hey, where are my nutrients? My nitrogen, this nitrate here, this critical level, and it's way down here. That tells us this is probably pretty low, right? Phosphorus, potassium on this one, they're both low as well. But on micronutrients, they're all seem to be pretty good for the most part. They'll also put over here what they recommend fertilizer-wise. They recommended 0.8 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet and vice versa. And I'm about to tell you how you can kind of put all that together and easily figure what you need to put out there. Here's just another one where you see where the phosphorus level is way high, really above the critical level. We see this quite a bit in lawns here in town, namely those that have been fertilized routinely over the years. Down here, it says, of course, nitrogen applies additional 1 pound per 1,000 square feet every 4 to 6 weeks is needed to maintain vegetative growth. But underneath that, it says phosphorus is highly elevated. Avoid phosphorus-containing fertilizers and organics for the next 5 years. Isn't that crazy? So, if you get a soil test that comes back with phosphorus this high, you definitely want to lay off using phosphorus, any type of phosphorus in fertilizer. Now, remember when I said that phosphorus will bind up iron and zinc? Now your plant can't utilize those, it can't take it up. And if you're having issues with maybe it's your turf grass or maybe it's in a vegetable garden, you're having issues with that, the ways you can correct that is you can do a foliar spray of iron and zinc. And I've got a little one-page handout at the back if you want to pick it up. If you're interested in that, you can pick it up that talks about how to do that and correct it. So again, this is why these are important. We highly encourage you to take soil samples just to see what your soil is before you really get to doing a whole lot with it. Okay, so calculating fertilizer needs. You measure, there's a lot of math here to come up with what your square footage is. I'm not going to dive very deep into that, but what I want to get to is our online calculators. So we do have an online calculator that makes it kind of easy for you to put in and what you need. If you'll go to soiltesting.tmu.edu, you don't have to worry about all this extra stuff here, but just this main part right here. It'll take you to the main page, and if you'll scroll to the bottom of that page, you'll see where it has, it'll say fertilizer calculators, and you can click on that, and it'll take you to this page here. It also has forms for sending soil samples in that you can print off and use. We have forms here in our office. If you need bags, there are bags, you can get them from here, and we'll give you a form. But you could also print forms off this website as well. So what you'd want to do, unless you had a big like agricultural operation, like you were growing a crop, maybe it's hay or wheat or cotton, you'd want to use an agricultural fertilizer calculator. For anything else, lawn and garden related, or in that nature, you want to use what we call an urban fertilizer calculator. You probably just use this one here, and you click on it, and let's see. This is the ag one. I'm going to skip through it. This is a little more in depth, but okay, here's the urban one, and here's what you do. So back on, let me go back to a soil test. Okay, so it says here, along the side on your results, these are all in parts per million. So like a nitrate is 7 parts per million, or phosphorus is 10, potassium is 34. Okay, keep that in mind. Let's fast forward to this page here. So up here in this box, you put in those numbers. How much nitrogen I had? I had 7 parts per million. How much phosphorus? I had 10. And then it'll give you over here your recommended rates. Then you come down here and you pull down the common available fertilizers, and you want to get to basically the percentage that it's going to tell you to put in. Remember we said that 5 and what was it, 5, 1, 3, I guess. So come up with that, and then you plug all your numbers in, and it'll, down here at the bottom, it'll tell you how much fertilizer you need for the area, or per 1,000 square feet. The big thing is you need to go back, you need to kind of measure and know where you're putting out. And then, this will give you an idea of what kind of fertilizer to buy, what those 3 numbers should be when you go to the store and you're looking for it, and then also how much you will need to buy to get a good coverage.
That ppm is parts per million?
Yeah, parts per million. Mm-hmm. So that kind of brings me to the end of this presentation. So I hope this got you kind of started with some soil basics. So the things to keep in mind, from clay to sand, and in between we have loam. Clay can get very compacted. There's just things to kind of remember. Clay can get very compacted. It makes it harder to grow things in if it's the higher the content the clay is. But you can amend that. On the flip side, you have really, really deep sand. If you were to live north of Hawley, for example, between Hawley and Anson, we call that the Shinnery area. There's a lot of shin oak that grows there. If you've traveled up 277, you've seen that strip that you drive through. That is very deep, deep sand, and it is very lacking in organic matter and things like that. It's hard to grow things as well too, so you have to amend things into it. Our next speaker is going to talk about amending soils. So depending on what kind of soil you have, so think about it, just think about how compact or how much clay content you have in your soil, or sand content, and which direction you need to go to amend it to make it very healthy soil to grow what you're wanting to grow. That's kind of how you can beat the West Texas toughness of growing plants. And I think later then we'll have Jackie Sledge going to talk about what you can grow here. So this has been an all-around program this morning. So
okay, we have John Guide. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
I always want to say yeah. Must be VGs or something, I don't know. He is going to talk about improving the soil after you find out what you have, or you may already know, and then we'll go from there. So take it away, John.
Okay. Volume level good for you guys? Joe, can you hear me?
You want any lights?
Okay.
Do any lights turned out?
No, we're good on the lights.
Okay.
That better, Joe? Okay. So Steve did a lot of good information on the backgrounds on, learning what your soil is. The thing we found here, if you're south of town especially, you've got extremely heavy clay. Move over this. Hopefully they don't get the feedback. So we usually have a lot of heavy clays, especially if you go down like Potosi area or stuff like that. I know I have absolutely horrid heavy clay. But you go up to, like he said, up to Holly and up towards Anson, and a lot of that stuff, it's like beach sand. You walk in it and you sink 3 inches. And so it's horrid trying to grow in this stuff. So we're going to talk about seeing what we can do to fix a lot of these problems. So what we're going to do is talk about fixing that soil structure as best we can. Some of it we just, it's a combination of, how much time and effort and money you want to put into it a lot of times. Next, talk a little bit more about fertilization. Not too much more than he already had, just a couple little minor things that he may not have hit on quite as well. And then we're going to talk a lot about mulch, or at least a little bit about mulch and some of the stuff that we can do with that to help improve our soils, and what it can do for helping us to grow stuff around here. So, clay soils. Clay soils are that very fine powder that it's really hard to get into. Once it gets moisture laden, it turns into mud. Once it dries out, it's concrete. Okay, so we're trying to loosen that up, seeing what we can do to improve some of that drainage so that when it doesn't stay that really muddy stuff, and it allows that moisture to drain out. So that's going to be the key thing. Now, how do we improve it? Compost. And more compost. And when you think you've had enough compost into it, double the amount you've already put in and add some more. Unfortunately, it's fairly simple to fix the clays and the sandy soils, is compost. A lot of that organic material into that will help build that soil structure, break it up a lot, and it takes up a lot of that the space that was being filtered in with all those small particles, and it pulls it apart. The other thing, there are 2 other things you can do with it. Expanded shale, and then a perlite or vermiculite. Okay, these 2 are rock-based products that are basically like adding small boulders into your clay structure to help expand them out. The other thing that both of these do is they will absorb moisture, not absorb it, but they have porous spaces inside of it to hold some of that moisture. So as the soil has all this moisture in it, a lot of it can filter into the small pieces of perlite or expanded shale, and you can go ahead and it won't dry out as quick for you. Now, when we're talking this amount of compost and expanded shale, here's where it gets interesting. If you really want to take like a full 100% clay soil, like we have the south side of town, and improve it to be a good loamy soil, on the sand, loam, silt triangle that Steve was talking about, we want to get into the middle. So we want about 1/3 of each. Well, if you're 100% something, that means you need to replace 2/3 of the soil with something else if it's all clay. So this is where it gets kind of interesting of at what point you're going to accept having clay soil. Okay, or a sandy soil, something like this. It's if you want to, there's 2 ways to do it. You can mix it in, you can replace it. So kind of fun either way. But the amounts that I've seen when you talk about adding like expanded shale is usually running about 30% expanded shale into your soil mix. Okay, that gets expensive very quickly. Okay, I haven't found a source to buy the expanded shale locally. I would assume some of the nurseries would be able to carry it, but I haven't actually looked for it.
Garden World has it.
Garden Hole does. So that would imply to me that also, places like Willow Creek and some of the others will have accessibility to at least get in expanded shale. Perlite, vermiculite you can usually get not only at the garden centers but also at the big box stores. But like I said, we're talking lots of, depending on how big of an area you're trying to amend, that's going to be a lot of cost up front to mix that in. Compost, a little bit different. You can make your own compost or you can buy it, but you're still looking at half, third to half of your soil is what you're trying to replace with. So there's a lot of effort to get that over. So, but that's all you have to do to fix your clay soils. Not much. Now, sandy soils. What are we looking at? Well, we're needing to tighten up that soil. It's so loose a lot of times, especially if like up near Holly, it's beach sand. There is no organic material in there almost. Okay, so we're adding all the organic material that we can. All right, you can add, if you want, other materials, but organic material is going to be the key one, because the good thing about organic material, it helps retain some of that moisture. Okay, so approving it. Looks awful similar to that last slide. Also, we're trying to add a lot of organic material. Now, most of this is going to probably be compost, but you can get other varieties of organic material. Either things like peat moss, sphagnum peat moss, or there's the one problem with sphagnum peat moss that you'll hear some people talk about. Peat moss is a non-renewable resource. It's pulled out of peat bogs. Most of those are in Canada that we get our peat moss from. Once they're gone, they're gone. Now, there's huge quantities of it and most people aren't using a whole lot of it. So, yeah, it's a fairly unlimited source at this point in time, but it is a non-renewable source. If you're looking for a more renewable source that would be something similar to sphagnum peat moss, would be what's called coconut coir. It's basically the shavings off of coconut. And they use that, and it's just very similar to peat moss. So that's a much more ecologically friendly environment for us. But like I said, we're talking compost, same amounts. A third, half, 2/3 of the soil needs to be replaced out with some form of, organic material to help bind that. Okay, you can add clay if you want. The one problem that you have adding clay to sand is if it dries out, you end up with a mortar mix, just like you have for your brick, laying bricks. So it works well as long as you don't let it dry out. I mean, it is even worse than clay when it comes to being concrete. So where are we going to get this compost from? You can either buy it or make it, your choice. The problem with buying it, it gets expensive. We're talking, there's one source that I know of in town that you can buy bulk compost. I do not know of any others. Does anybody know of any place other than the garden center that's on Treadway that we're not officially allowed to endorse? So I think that's the only one that in town that has compost for sale at bulk rates. It's actually pretty decent compost. I use it quite a bit. I've gotten, I think, 10 cubic yards so far this year, and I need another 10 at the house to give you an idea how much I use. But it runs about $100 or so a cubic yard. They do deliver in 5 cubic yard increments, but that has to be factored into that cost also. If you have a pickup truck, you can go get it loaded up into your pickup truck. That works well. But like I said, if you're doing a fairly large area, even not a large area, if you're doing a reasonable size vegetable garden or something where you're trying to add a lot of compost into it to loosen up that soil, it's a lot more than you want to do with bags. You can go to any of the big box stores, any of the garden centers, you can buy it in bags. Okay, the pricing that I have up there is one of the box store pricings for bags at $155, $160 a cubic yard. It's pretty expensive if you're using a lot of it. Okay, Like I said, I've already used 10 yards this year, so I can't afford $1,500. So it's one of those things we really have to think about where we're going to be getting that compost from. Okay. A couple of things to consider when you're working with the compost that you're going to be adding into your soils. Compost is full of all sorts of microorganisms, bacteria, molds, mildews, fungi, all sorts of fun stuff. Know when your last tetanus shot was, because some of those things are pretty nasty. I learned long ago, I was getting close to about that time I should probably be getting a tetanus shot, and my son happened to roll over a 0th birthday, like a 20. I was like, that's a good reminder. So every time my son hits a 0 level birthday, I go get a new tetanus shot. That way when they ask me, oh, do you need a tetanus shot? No, I know what it's doing. So, if you've got any cuts or wounds, make sure you keep those covered and covered well. Wear gloves. Now, that'll help keep a little bit of the abrasion down so you don't get any extra cuts and nicks and stuff while you're working with the compost. Compost, because it has all of those nasties in it that are healthy for the soil but not necessarily for you, you're going to want to go ahead and sprinkle that compost down and make sure it doesn't give off any dust. Breathing in that dust can be pretty nasty. If you're like me, I've got asthma. One of the things that sets it off is mold. And so when I work with compost, I have to make sure I've got a pretty good mask on, or the compost has been wet thoroughly so that I don't have to worry about it. One good thing about me, I'm working in large amounts of compost. I have heavy machinery to move the compost, so I don't have to get my face into it quite as much. When you get done using the compost, make sure you scrub your hands. We've learned over the last 3 years how to wash our hands again. This comes off of experience. When I was younger, with my son, we were in Scouts. A couple of the adults, we were sitting back and we were getting ready for a meal, and we watched all the Scouts through, and we were getting ready to wash our hands. So everybody went to the bathroom, and we were standing there by the sink, and we watched 1 out of 4 Scouts stop and wash their hands. Come on, guys, learn how to do this. It's not hard. But make sure you take a few precautions when you're working with the compost. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. For clay soil, what is the proper way to amend it, to put all this stuff into?
I'll get to that in a few minutes. Okay. Now, one of the things about making compost, if you haven't done it before, stay away from most of the online and book sources. They are written by people that are not from the semi-desert area that we're in. I've found that a lot of the resources that they have, they're there, either they're from a very wet environment, or a lot of the book sources which I found, they aren't necessarily, like a peer-reviewed scientific thing. They're just how they do it. And so it may or may not be very accurate in what actually needs to take place with the science. So, Big Country Master Gardeners does have a website, a YouTube channel. On that YouTube channel, they actually have a compost lecture. Those of us that have been to, you all that have been to my lecture series, this is my lecture I did at the compost at the library. It's about 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it covers everything you need to know about compost around here. So it's pretty good. It's got a lot of good information. If you have any more questions on how to make the compost, contact the Master Gardeners. We'll go ahead and make sure we get those questions answered. Okay, one thing about composting, and this is one of the things I definitely bring up in my lecture, broadleaf weed killers. We had that discussion on Thursday for the Master Gardener trainees. One of the things this was brought up when we were talking compost and making compost. Broadleaf weed killer does not decompose when it goes through the composting process. It does not get decomposed when going through animals, such as horses. So if you have a crop that has been sprayed with a broadleaf weed killer and you put the remnants of that crop into your compost pile, you end up with killer compost. That broadleaf weed killer will stay active enough to kill off anything in your gardens that you're working with. One of the ladies was asking about lawn clippings, and we told her, it says, yeah, the big problem you have to worry about is with those broadleaf weed killers, it takes 3 years for that, the 2,4-D to break down in the environment to the point where it is no longer active. Okay? So you cannot use, if you've sprayed your lawn for something like dandelions, yeah, it's a broadleaf weed killer that you've just sprayed on there, so you can't use those clippings on that yard for a couple of years. So it's something to take into account. This website here, the New Mexico Composters.org, that is the New Mexico version of A&M. They have a very good composting site, and that's it. They've got a lot of good information on it to deal with composting, and they also have a lot of information on the broadleaf herbicides in your compost pile. One thing to think about if we're talking about composting is how long it's going to take. Composting can take 3 to 6 months if you're doing it as a hot compost pile. If you're doing it as a cold compost pile, which is one where you're not turning it and trying to get it aerated, these numbers are usually closer to a year, year and a half. Okay, so this is something you may want to think about if you're going to be adding, doing a garden. This is going to take a little bit of time for you to get some compost if you're going to make it for yourself. So, the other thing, if you do a hot compost pile, it usually burns up about half of the pile size, goes away in heat. So you start with a cubic yard, you end up with half a cubic yard. So we are in the desert-ish area, although the wonderful rain we had last night, a lot of times we don't have rain for a month or two. So the bins that we do use, we usually want to have them covered. Usually want to have harder side walls on them so that they don't get a lot of airflow into it. Compost thermometers work well to keep an eye on it and make sure it's keeping nice and warm. As you notice on this compost pile, we've got the top layer dries out, even if it's covered. Okay, the inside stays nice and moist, but the top layer gets dried out. This is why we have to turn the compost piles and usually end up with a hot compost pile. That top layer just will not decompose in the desert. Now, we're asked about soil amending. We've got 4 different ways we can use the compost once we get it, or any of the other amendments. We can top dress, which is just basically spreading it out over the soil. We can, either till it in or turn for, use a pitchfork, turn the soil, get it all mixed in nice and easy. If we're not doing large areas, we can do things like compost plugs, which is basically we'll dig a hole, bury a pile of compost, and put it in. This is usually done for things like trees, where we're trying to do a little bit of a fertilization around a tree to help give it some extra boost for itself. And compost tea. Compost tea is basically adding a lot of extra water to the compost pile, letting it leach through, and just like a tea, it pulls a little bit of those nutrients and bacteria off of the pile and out into the wastewater that flows off. Had a master gardener back in Midland that did this all the time. He built his compost pile about 2 cinder bricks off the ground, and with a flat board at the bottom with plastic over it, and then sloped it to one corner. And so he'd water down his compost pile, and at the bottom of that point of the board, he had a 5-gallon bucket. And so whenever he watered down his compost pile to keep it nice and moist, any of the excess moisture fell off into that bucket, and he had a whole bucket of compost tea that he could use. So it was kind of a neat way of doing it. When we're digging it in, we're talking, like I said, we're needing to go 1/3 to 1/2 or more a lot of times of the soil. So we're adding a lot of stuff on top and then mixing it in. Rototillers work very well for this. Doing it by hand, especially if it's a large area, is going to be a lot of work. So you may want to think about that. When we're talking about spreading it out, how much are we going to need? Well, depending on your area, if you think about it, a single cubic foot of soil or cubic foot of compost, when you put it 1 inch deep, will cover about 12 square feet. Okay, well, if we're talking a cubic yard, that's 27 cubic feet. Okay, so a cubic yard will cover about a 25 by 25, let's see, I'm trying to remember the math again, hold on. Yeah, it's 27 times your 12, so yeah, 300 or 400 cubic square feet will cover by that 1 cubic yard of compost, 1 inch deep. But, you know, we're talking we need 3 or 4 inches of depth at least when we were adding in compost, maybe 6 inches, so that's when, you know, you realize how much compost you're going to start needing, yeah, even for a small area. Okay, talk a little bit about fertilization. When we're talking fertilization, I've got 2 listed here. It's effectively 3. When we're talking organic or non-organic, when we're talking organic, we're talking OMRI labeled. This is the organization that monitors places to make sure that they're following the guidelines set by the federal government on whether or not they can sell it labeled as an organic product. It makes things a lot more expensive because of, you know, the paperwork that gets involved with that. Is it any better? Usually not. Okay. Then you've got the inorganic, which is the same stuff, just doesn't have the paperwork trail on it a lot of times. And then the other thing that you can get is what we call is more of an inorganic type fertilizer. These are more of the chemicalized fertilizers that you usually buy at the store. As Steve was talking about, get a soil sample. If you aren't fertilizing by the soil, you know, what your results are for your soil, you have no idea what you're actually got, and you can actually do a lot of damage to your plants if you over-fertilize in one particular way or another. You know, as he was saying, the phosphorus will lock up the iron. Well, the iron doesn't, you know, if you don't have any iron, you get a lot of iron chlorosis in a lot of your plants, and it's, you know, harder for the plants to survive. So it's one of the things you really have to work with. One of the things to think about when we're talking about that fertilizer and how much we're going to be putting down, compost is about the equivalent of a 1-1-1 fertilizer per inch of rate applied. So if we put a 6-inch pile of compost on our soil, that's about adding a 6-6-6 fertilizer across that whole area. And if we have like a high phosphorus rate, that's, you know, we don't want to do that. So we have to kind of take that into account while we're doing other fertilization rates. Okay? When we're talking about the fertilizers, you know, you'll see a bag, it's got that listed, you know, 3 numbers on it, you know, 10, 10, 10 or whatnot. That is the amount of that particular chemical that it has in there based on the weight. Okay? Now when we get that soil sample back, it says we need, you know, 1 pound, 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. This is where this comes real handy. Okay? So if we've got like a 50-pound bag of 10-10 fertilizer, you know, we've got 5 pounds of nitrogen, 5 pounds of phosphorus, 5 pounds of potassium in there. Okay? So this allows us to figure out very quickly, I need this many pounds for this many square feet. Okay? One of the things that Steve didn't mention specifically, he kind of talked about it, when we're talking about fertilizers, the easy way to think of fertilizers is up, down, and sideways when we're talking the nutrients. Nitrogen is for growth. The phosphorus is for root growth. The potassium is for fruiting and for reseeding, for reproduction purposes. So if we're talking, you know, veggies and that sort of stuff, we're usually going to end up with a lot more potassium than anything else. So this is one of the things to think about when we're looking at what we're trying to do, especially in like vegetable gardening. Always follow the product labels. Most of the product labels, when you'll find, you'll apply the fertilizer out to the yard or wherever you're going to be doing it. One of the first things they say is water in immediately. Okay? Because a lot of times, especially with like nitrogen and sunlight volatilizes pretty quickly, and you lose a lot of that nitrogen that you might be trying to put into your soil. So you want to wash it, you know, get it washed into the soil fairly quickly. Talking about a 4,000 square foot lawn, say, and we need to add some fertilizer to it. The reason I put 4,000 square feet of lawn space, that's, if you're in town, that's about what you've got for lawn space, give or take, okay? Say that your soil sample came back, says I need about 10 pounds of nitrogen, don't need any phosphorus, but I do need some potassium. Grab myself a bag of 2803 fertilizer from the big box store. Comes in about 40-pound bags. So you'll take that as a percentage, multiply it by the total in the bag, and that says you've got about that many pounds of nitrogen in that bag. Well, I need 10 pounds per square foot. Oh, that's pretty close. So I can go ahead and add that into the fertilizer. One thing I will recommend though, and this is kind of an interesting thing, no matter how much you fertilize sidewalks, driveways, and roads, they will not grow. Keep your fertilizer on your grass, lawns, and garden beds. Don't spread it over. Anything that you spread over ends up getting washed into the storm drains, which gets washed down into the Gulf eventually, and we end up with the big algae blooms and death zones down in the Gulf. So try and keep everything you can under the areas that actually need it. As he was talking about, there's the website for the soil calculators. If you do go to hit the QR code and go to our seminars to get that stuff, it's actually just basically our Big Country Master Gardener webpage. Those calculators are very handy if you don't want to go through the little math of figuring out how much you need. Okay, talking mulches, all right? Now, when we're talking mulches, we're talking organic or inorganic. Inorganic mulches are going to be things like rubber mulch, decomposed granite, or I've seen glass, like tumbled glass used as a mulch. Remember, we're talking about building soil structure here. None of those inorganic components will break down or help improve the soil. They look pretty, but that's about it. Okay? We've got enough problems trying to grow things in West Texas. We don't need to add just, okay, it looks pretty. We need something that actually is functional. So we're going to go with an organic mulch of some sort. For the most part, that's going to be wood chips of one variety or another. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't rubber or glass also contain heat and build that up?
Yeah, especially like decomposed granite and rubber will actually keep a little bit of extra heat into the ground, which isn't necessarily what we want except in the wintertime. So, and it's one of those things that's also why we try and avoid them a little bit. When we're talking mulch, it's wood products usually, either the chipped or the shredded. It's kind of a choice on what you want to get. You can buy both in bags. If you're getting it in bulk, it's usually going to be the shredded, just because that's the easier for them to find. The free mulch that you get from the city is going to be the shredded. It works very well. It binds together as kind of a tight mat once it gets wet once and kind of swells up. So it works really well as a good mulch. The chip mulch is kind of a product of, do you like the look of chipped or do you like the shredded? I personally like the chipped, so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll do shredded down first and then another little layer on top of the chip to make it look pretty for me. Yes, sir?
What would it do if you were to till in some of the shred, what you get from the city?
Okay.
Till it into your ground.
Okay, if you till in some of the mulch into the ground, it does add organic compounds or organic material into the soil. The problem is the decomposition process of that wood product being decomposed in the ground sucks a lot of the nitrogen out. So if you do that, you're going to have to adjust your fertilization to add a little extra nitrogen into it to make sure that it'll actually decompose and not suck the nitrogen from the plants. I actually did have a friend of mine that did that in his entire yard back in Midland, but it was all sand soil. He needed a lot of organic material. So, yes, ma'am.
The cotton burr, is that considered a mulch?
Cotton burr could be considered a mulch, yes. It's almost a fertilizer at that point. It's kind of a compost. So it'll work pretty decent. One thing to think about on the cotton burr, a lot of times the farmers do spray that with 2,4-D to clear off the leaves before they harvest. So if you're going to do it, try and get the organic. Yes, ma'am?
Do you prefer the wood over straw mulching?
Okay, I was just about to talk about that. Okay, the other organics that you can use is straw or hay for a mulch. Those work well. Usually, if I'm going to use that, I'm going to use that in a vegetable garden as opposed to like a flower garden, just because of looks. The one thing to think about though is the 2,4-D. A lot of the straw and hay products do get sprayed with 2,4-D because they're trying to get rid of the broadleaf weeds in the fields. So, you're going to want to try and go for an organic version of that if you can, which jumps the cost quite a bit, unfortunately. Type of wood really doesn't matter, except for if you're going to do cedar. Cedar does not decompose very quickly unless it's in a lot of moisture, and that's not going to happen around here. So if you want to do like a top dressing with cedar to make it look pretty and smell pretty, that's fine. But understand that it's going to take forever for that mulch to break down. So, when we're talking mulch, you go to somebody's landscape yard that they've just had the landscaper come in and add mulch, and they added this much mulch. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking mulch, 4 to 6 inches of mulch. There's a couple of reasons for this, which I'll get into in a second, but you really want that good thick layer of mulch to really get the benefits for it. Now, what are the benefits? Well, when we're talking mulch, that layer between the dirt and the bottom of the mulch is slowly in a decomposition process. So that decomposes through microorganisms. It's a mini compost pile right there. And so it breaks down, adds nutrients to the soil a little bit in the way that the compost would. And it's got a lot of that nutrient value in it that it'll slowly add to the soil. It'll add both an absorbing capacity to the soil and also a holding capacity, because it'll suck up that water and then hold on to it, especially in that bottom layer. Okay, that bottom layer, if you've ever put in a good heavy layer of mulch and let it sit for 6 months where it's had some moisture in it, that bottom inch or two, it's not soil, but it's not mulch anymore. It's something in between. It's a half composted thing. It is beautiful stuff to add, retain moisture. Because it is that big, heavy, thick blanket of 4 to 6 inches, the wind can't get to it. Okay? And so our evaporation rate goes way down. Okay? We can cut our watering rates down by half almost if we're talking a flower bed. Reduces erosion. When we're talking rainfall around here, we get it in short bursts, very heavy downfalls, big drops. That water comes in, it does two things when the rainwater hits the ground. Compacts the ground for one, right at the top layer. But in that process of compacting it also kicks up a lot of that dust. And that dust and stuff gets washed off. So if that water is hitting that mulch layer, it's breaking up all that energy impact so it doesn't compact the soil underneath, and it lets the soil not get eroded because you don't have that flowing water across the top. Controls weeds. Oh, this is one of the greatest benefits of mulch, especially a big enough layer of mulch. This is where the 1 inch of mulch really breaks down. If you've got a mulch that's this big, when you've got a seedling for a weed that starts to pop up, that seed has enough growth to go about 2 inches, growing up before, it gets those first leaves to start getting sunlight. Well, if I've got a 1 inch layer of mulch, that weed can poke all the way through the mulch and start getting enough sunlight to start growing as the weed. But if you've got a 4 to 6 inch layer of mulch, it can't get through it. So anything that does germinate doesn't make it through the mulch very well. The other thing is we get a lot of seeds that will blow in with our wonderful winds, especially in spring. And those seeds will land on top of your mulch. Well, because it's not in soil, the root structure is very loose in that, as it's trying to work its way into that mulch. And so if you do need to weed, you just walk by and just kind of pull. Or even sometimes I'll just walk through and just kick the mulch around a little bit. And just that is enough to destroy the root structure on that weed, and it dies out. So it's very easy to do weeding. I have large areas of flower gardens in my yard. I don't spend more than maybe 5 minutes a week weeding because of this. And when I say large areas of flower gardens, I have more flower gardens in my area than most people have lawn in their yard. So I've got 4,000 or 5,000 square feet of garden space in my house. So, the other big thing is, yes ma'am?
So how often or when do you know you need to water when we have mulch that thick?
But if you're worrying about trying to figure out how much moisture you need, I'm sure Jackie will bring this up a little bit. Usually we're looking at about 1 inch of moisture a week for most of our plants. But if we've got that heavy layer of mulch, a lot of times all you have to do is just reach under, kind of scrape it around, see if the soil itself is actually moist. And if it is, you can probably just put the mulch back over. If it's starting to dry out a little at that mulch layer, grab a screwdriver. This is one of the easiest tests to see if you've got it. Push that screwdriver in the ground. If you can get the screwdriver in the ground reasonably easily to 4 or 5 inches, you've got enough moisture. So you can probably wait another couple days. But if it's starting to get a little hard, go ahead and irrigate your system.
I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to mulch, but I kind of hold back on mulching because sometimes I like to throw seeds out there. So can you throw like a packet of wild seeds on top of the mulch and that grow?
Yeah, if you want to throw the seed, if you want to do like seeding and stuff over top of the mulch, that's fine. Just understand though that if you do have that 4 to 6 inch layer of mulch, those seeds won't reseed very well. Okay, it's all going to be right at that top layer. So it may be a little harder for some of those seeds to germinate, say, next year if you're going to try and do like a perpetual native garden. Okay. Now, soil temperature is one of the other neat things that it does. Like I said, we've got a 4 inch blanket of mulch on top of this soil. You can go in and you get the little laser guns that tell you what the temperature is on a surface. You can sit there, hold it on top of the mulch. It'll be reading 130, 140 degrees sometimes. Swipe that mulch to the side and hit the ground temperature and you're 40 degrees cooler. So that helps. That's one of the reasons you save a lot on your moisture for irrigation, is because that soil is not nearly as hot. So it's not evaporating off the moisture. The other thing is in winter, think Snowmageddon. We've had a lot of plants froze and died out. Well, it was because it was a dry winter. We had a little bit of moisture in the Snowmageddon, but it was so cold that the ground itself was freezing to a couple of inches. Well, if you have a 4 inch blanket on top of that ground temperature stays a lot warmer. So you don't lose. A lot of times you won't lose a plant because of the freeze. The top half may die out, but the roots usually won't, as long as the plant can grow back from the rootstock. So, okay. We do have a YouTube channel, which I do recommend you go see. We have most of our garden presentations that we do at the library have been recorded for the last year and a half now. We are on Facebook. Facebook keeps us up to date on what's coming up and going around through our organization for things like our plant sale, for all the different classes that we've got. And any other questions that you've got for us on how to improve the soils? Yes, ma'am.
So, is it worth it, the battle with the native soil, or would it just be easier and less costly to do raised beds?
Okay, is it easier to use the native soil and amend it, or go to raised beds? Depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing something like a vegetable garden, I like doing it in raised beds for 2 reasons. 1, you can control the soil a lot better. And 2, I do raised beds that are right about this level, so that I can sit on top of the edge of the raised bed while I'm working on them, so it makes it very nice and easy. Also, it's not bending over quite as much. Now, if you're talking for a garden for native plants and stuff, like pretty flowers, Jackie's going to talk about all the different varieties that you can do that will actually grow in our soils for the most part. Usually a little bit of amending will work. You know, a little bit of compost onto a soil, mix that in so it's not nearly the huge cost, but it is a little bit of a cost. Then you can grow the natives really well here, just in the ground.
So if you have extremely deep raised beds, what did you fill them?
I do have the nice tall raised beds, and it was a little bit hard to fill them. I learned long ago that I make my raised beds effectively very large compost bins. I start with junk mail, cardboard boxes,
You do the layering?
No, I don't even bother with this. I do tree branches, any yard waste that I have, and I will fill the bottom foot to foot and a half with all sorts of that sort of stuff to fill up the bottom chunk of it, and then I'll fill the top foot or so with my garden, my vegetable garden soil. The problem that I run into is each year that big pile of wood products that can decomposes. Remember that? You lose half of the volume. So every year, or at least for the first 2 years, I'll lose 6 to 8 inches of soil through compaction, and I have to add the next year. But I've got a year to work on making more compost to add into that bed for the next year. So that's the way to really do it. If you have big, heavy, large logs, that works really well. We're talking tree trunk size.
The Google method?
Yeah, kind of like a hugelkultur method, because those take a very, very long time to break down, so you don't get quite that soil loss year over year. Any other questions? Come on. No questions on soil mending, fertilization, mulch, anything? Got one over here.
You did mention using to fertilize or even to compost your leaves and just breaking up stuff and just even your old branches and stuff. You ever throw that in?
Yeah, what I add into my compost pile. I'm going to refer you back to the video that we have on the compost. But yeah, most of my yard waste, I don't spray anything for broadleaf weeds, so I don't have a problem with that. So I can use all of my yard waste and yard clippings and anything like that, I can throw in my compost pile.
And that YouTube channel, just look up Master Gardeners or what?
Look up Big Country Master Gardeners.
Big Country Master Gardeners, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a very big yard with no sprinkler system.
Yeah.
Fertilizer, I mean, I've tried just watching the weather, if it's gonna rain, I hurry up and get it, but what do you recommend?
Okay, a large yard where you don't have a sprinkler system and then having to worry about watering it right after fertilization. You're going to have to probably, like I said, time it for weather if you can. But even that, they say, oh, we're going to get rain, but your neighbor does, you don't. Yeah, I know how that goes. Trust me. You're going to have to probably figure out some way to water it in. With a hose or something like that, or one of the manual sprinkler systems, with the big rain ones. I will be talking irrigation at the library in a week and a half, if you want to contact me there. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Do you have the pros and cons of different types of raised bed materials, like what they're formed with?
Okay, pros and cons on various raised beds materials. For the most part, you can pretty much use anything you want. It's kind of a looks issue. I personally use cinder block. The reason I do the cinder block is they're cheap. I do not mortar them together, I just stack them. I just have to make sure that the ground's flat and level where I'm starting with. They're also 8 inches wide, so they make a very good bench to sit on. So that's one of the reasons I like them. If you're using wood is acceptable, but you have to make sure that you do pressure treat it. If you're doing it for vegetable gardens, it is officially listed now that most of the major nasty chemicals that they used to use for pressure treating have been removed, like the arsenic. So you can actually use pressure treated wood for your raised beds. The one problem that you will find is that they do rot out over time. So I recommend putting in a layer or two of plastic on the edges to try and keep some of the moisture off of the wood to extend their length of how long they can go. You could also use rot-resistant wood like cedar. There are some that you can do with galvanized metal. Those work well too. Like I said, most of them, I haven't found any that don't work well. It's just a matter of preference on what they look like and cost. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from out of town, like Arizona. I have problems with blood orange and red grapes been growing, then it grow, and then after 3-4 years, it just,
That's a
yeah.
specific problem on oranges and grapes and stuff growing in Arizona. My guess is it's probably a fertilization problem. You're probably missing some nutrients in there or a pH problem. Okay, so get a good soil sample test. My guess is that if you fix either the soil pH to the right level so you can get the nutrients into the plant, or have enough extra nutrients there for the plant to take up, that probably will solve those problems. Yes, ma'am.
For filler in the bottom of a raised bed, is it okay to use mesquite trimmings?
Can you use mesquite trimmings in the bottom of your raised beds? I would give them at least 1 full year of having been dead. Mesquite is notorious for regrowing wherever it touches. So if you can make sure that it's actually dead, then you can use it. And it's fairly rot resistant too. So it'll probably work pretty well. Yes, ma'am.
Let's say something I might have done and I'm not aware of it. I might have over-fertilized. If they do that, how do you fix that?
Okay, if you've over-fertilized, depends on the particular fertilization that you've used. If it's like a phosphorus, we've got the handout back there that you can look at to reduce the phosphorus. For other types of nutrients, a lot of it is just don't fertilize for a while, or possibly maybe plant some plants in there that'll suck up some of those specifics. One of the things you find out, things like you want to try and do more of a grass, a plant that will suck up a lot of nutrients of nitrogen if you've got a lot of nitrogen excess. But like Steve was saying, probably around here you probably aren't going to have a lot of excess of nitrogen. Your mains are going to be phosphorus and potassium. If you got a lot of extra potassium, I don't see a negative on that necessarily. Just you can do a lot of fruiting plants in that soil. So. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do the last question because we need to kind of move on. Yes, sir?
Do you do any kind of ground cover for the winter?
Do I do
Fill it in later?
do I do like cover crops for to cover over the winter? Not particularly. Usually I do keep mulch over most of my beds, even my vegetable beds, so I don't have to worry about anything like that. Cover crops do work. What the idea of cover crops is that you grow a crop that you don't let it get all the way to maturity, and then at the end of that growing season you kind of till it back in to add fertilization, usually in the forms of nitrogen from that plant. So, okay, I think we'll call it there because we need to kind of get moving on. And just
We'll go ahead and start this last session. Jackie actually has two, and I'm sorry I don't have the notes in front of me, just two different presentations, but they're combined in this one session. And Jackie Sledge is going to talk to you about plants that grow well here, either based on state trials or natives in this area. And then after Jackie wraps up, we'll talk about some upcoming activities for both the library and then Saturday seminars and then the plant sale. That it?
That's it.
All right. Y'all enjoy.
Okay, can y'all hear me? Yes. I can't tell if it's on or not. My ear is stopped up. So, you can't. I can't hear you. Jackie. You can get a little louder. Okay, how's that? That's better. Yes, all right. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Texas Superstars. And this is a group of plants that has been studied, and they have been determined to be hardy. And I'm getting too.
I know.
Okay. Am I too close to something?
I have no idea.
Okay. But they are really attractive plants. You know, a lot of times when you think about the hardy plants or the native plants, you think, oh, you know, you need to have a rock garden and you need to have a cactus, right? Right, you know, that's pretty much what we think about when we think about natives out here. But it really is a lot, there are a lot of different kinds of plants that are considered superstars. So we're going to go through those today. So how is a plant named a superstar? Well, there are folks from College Station and Lubbock and Uvalde, I think he is still on, San Antonio, and they study plants all the time. And this group gets together and they determine, after some years of trials, how do these plants work? And that's who determines the superstars. They also get advice from horticulturists, from extension agents, and from the people who run arboretums or botanical gardens to see how the plants perform in those areas also. And so then the executive board names them, they decide which ones to select. And it's usually, once they start really seriously looking at a plant, it may be 2 or 3 or more years before they have enough data to say, yeah, this one is going to work. And so that's why it takes such a long time. These plants are grown in plots across Texas. And right now, the plots are in College Station, San Antonio, Overton, and originally those were the only 3, and then Lubbock finally said, hey, we can grow plants up here too. And then that kind of brings in a new dynamic. When you're talking about acidic soils and lots of water, and it's quite different than when you get out here and you have the alkaline soils and the wind that is always about 50 miles an hour and little rain, and so that gives them some idea of what would work out in our area. So we were really glad to see some trials being started in Lubbock. Now, ornamental plants are a little different because they are subjective according to what you like in your yard and what landscapers like to put in yards. So they get advice from landscapers and companies like that. How are they working? What do people want? Do they perform well in the environments? So another factor that's considered in determining a superstar is, can these plants be grown? If you can't get enough to sell to the nurseries and the landscapers, there's no reason naming it a superstar if you can't buy one to put in your yard. So the main triangle of growth is the Dallas Metroplex, San Antonio, and Houston. Those are the big cities, so they're the ones that do most of the growing. And if they can grow enough plants to supply Texas, and maybe beyond, then they will go ahead and add that as a superstar. Now, they're tough plants. They're beautiful plants. A lot of them are gorgeous. And they're successful in a lot of the areas across Texas. Now, we usually talk about not everything grows everywhere in the state of Texas, right? So you have to look at what would grow in our area. And I really like the fact that when they name superstars, they say the average homeowner can be successful with these. I, for one, I can kill the plants with the best of them. So I need something that's tough, it's going to look good, and I will be able to be successful with it. But there's some considerations when you're talking about superstars. You need to look at your hardiness zone. Now, I'm going to speak for, our area right here. And we used to be a 7B And we were that for years and years. And then when they started looking at readjusting some of the zones, they changed us to an 8A. So a lot of folks still don't think that we are an 8A. It's a 7B. And it's kind of interesting, and I will show you the map in just a minute. Part of Taylor County is 7B still, and part of Taylor County is 8A. So it depends on where you live, even in this one county, what zone you are in. And then you also have to look at soil amendments, sunshade requirements, heat, cold. Now, you can grow any plant you want to, as long as you want to spend the money and your time to do it. I know there was someone who moved here a number of years ago from a nice, wet, acidic part of the state, and their favorite plant was an azalea. Okay, it took about 2 weeks for them to realize that azaleas don't grow well in Abilene. But they had this real love for them. So they had someone come in, dig out soil, bring in new soil that was going to be acidic, and then they planted the whole front with azaleas. Well, it wasn't just a one-time thing. You have to keep going and going and going to keep it, to keep them alive. Well, after a number of years, or a few years, they decided, I think we'll go to something that will grow in Abilene and be successful without spending all the money and all the time doing it. So here's the hardiness zone. And Abilene is right there in Taylor County. When we look at 8A, 8A starts here, goes up, takes in this part of Taylor County and Jones, and then goes all the way to Louisiana. So when you look at plants, you can't just say, oh, it's an 8A, so it will definitely grow here. I'm in good shape. You need to look at the soil requirement for it, because maybe the 8A azalea is meant for here, but the 8A azalea is not going to be here. So you need to always check the soil, if it says it needs alkaline soil or if it needs acidic soil. A lot of them will say it doesn't matter. Those are the kind we need. But always check that. If you live in, well, Nolan is 7B still, Fisher, all of the counties, and then the bottom half of Taylor. So just, when I'm buying, I'm looking at 7B because with the 7B, it has a lower cold tolerance, and I want to make sure if an 8A is what, 25, we get below 25, and so that's why I try to get the ones that are a little bit tougher. Okay, so let's look at the annual superstars. They last 1 year. They grow from seed, they bloom, they produce seeds, and then they die. Now, some of these, when we look at them, you think, we see these every year. Well, they're not coming back from that plant. They're coming back from the seeds that they've spit out on the ground. So that's why you see them returning. They bloom for a long time. You can have annuals that will start blooming in the spring and go through fall. And when we look at superstars, some of them will bloom very well into the fall. I'm just going to quickly go through some of these are the annuals. The Angelonia Serena series. Now, there are going to be a lot of different types of Angelonias. So when you're looking at you're at the store and you're looking at the Angelonia, if it doesn't say it's a Serena, then it is not going to be a superstar plant. They're pretty smart. A lot of the growers will put their superstar plants they grow in a pot that says Texas Superstar, so that makes it easy to see. Some of them don't put them in a pot, but they will put Superstar on the tag, so you can always look for that. whopper begonias. You know, we have the regular begonias, but the whoppers are the ones that are considered superstars.
Find that Burger King.
Huh?
I think you find them at Burger King.
That would be a good place to go. Wish they should grow some and advertise it for us, shouldn't they? But we have grown angelonias here. We have grown whopper. I know people have grown whopper begonias. The euphorbias. We get to the Texas bluebonnet. And mine is not growing. Mine is in a pot. And I dug it up so I could bring something that's a superstar. But the Texas bluebonnet is a superstar. And then, you know, A&M has developed the Texas maroon bluebonnet. You know, get them, right? You know, they have to have a mark. And then Lady Bird Johnson has a royal blue one. There was a professor at A&M that took the maroon ones and the blue ones, and then he had another white flower, and he did a big Texas flag in his field to advertise the bluebonnet, the Texas bluebonnet, and the maroon one. So it's a big deal somewhere. Then the New Look celosia. This is a relatively new one, and it's a bright red, and it's really pretty, well, kind of a maroony red. Blue Days, we have grown that, and if you ever need a plant that is definitely going to weather the bad weather, Blue Days will do it. We planted Vinca Blue Days, periwinkles. We planted some of those in those big planters that the Expo Center has. We planted them last year in cold, rainy, windy weather. And then they sat out here in the heat, the wind, the sun, and they were just amazing. They were gorgeous.
Do you happen to know the botanical name?
I will show you how to find it in a minute. And then the Allison Mexican Heather, Dakota Gold, Helenium, Larkspur. I love larkspurs. I mean, I lived with my grandmother for a while when I was little, and she had irises and larkspurs, you know, so they have such a good memory that I love to plant larkspurs. And then the Lobularia. There are a lot of annuals. The Rio series Mandevillas, Mary Mums, Laura Bush petunias, and they grow really well here. And then the Tidal Wave series of petunias. They are cherry, red velour spreading, and silver. Yeah, there are a lot of different petunias. It either needs to be a Laura Bush or a tidal wave in order for it to be considered a superstar. And then the butterfly deep pink pentas, which it was kind of an add-on later because we already had pentas, but this was a special variety, and so they added that. Purslane and the Vinca Cora, those are amazing. And then fall zinnias. We also planted a bunch of the Cora Vinca, and they really grew. I grew them at my house this last year in pots on my front porch, and they were huge. My husband asked me, what did you feed them? And I said, nothing. They survived the sun and the wind and the heat, and they bloomed all summer long. They were great. Okay, now perennials, they're a little bit different. They have to be plants that will last at least 2 years. If I were making a definition, I would say perennials would have to last a lot longer than 2 years. But the superstar definition, they have to last at least 2 years. And they have little or no woody growth. If there's a lot of woody growth, then it moves them into the tree or shrub category. So the perennials, the Texas Gold's Columbine, and it has to be Texas Gold. I've already been watching for some of these, And I've seen a lot of columbines for sale around here, but the Texas Gold is not here yet. They're different colors. Hibiscus, the Flare, the Lord Baltimore, and the Muy Grande. Those are all really gorgeous hibiscus, and they will grow here well. The Nugo lantana is, I think it's probably one of the hardiest plants you can plant. We moved into the house where we live now over 20 years ago, and we put out some Nugo lantana, and that same Nugo lantana is blooming and growing still. You know, I just get my shears and cut it back every year, and then it just comes right back. It survived the snow, the ice, the heat, the drought. It just keeps on blooming. Trailing lantana is also, it's lower to the ground, and you can get it in purple or white or yellow, and they are just stunning. They make really pretty additions if you have a pot and you need a spiller. They're pretty there. Also, just to fill in around the border or under trees. Turk's Cap is another superstar. The Lindheimer Muley grass, Princess Caroline Napier grass. We got one of those and trialed it. You know, they say always the right plant in the right place, and it works really well. And we planted the Princess Caroline grass in one of those rings out here in front. And it was gorgeous, you know, beautiful, beautiful purplish leaves, you know, just gorgeous. And the next year we needed to do some work in there, and we decided it needed to be moved. We would see how it would transplant. Well, the roots went from the top of that all the way to the ground. And there were two of us up there with shovels trying to, you know, pop that thing out. So, you know, that's a plant that if you want it, make sure you put it in the place you want it before, while you were doing it the first time. Another one in that same series is black stockings, and it's a very stunning grass also. The dwarf Mexicano petunia, John Fanick's phlox, Victoria phlox, and plumbago. I know that y'all have all seen those. We've grown those. They do well here. Mexican bush sage, Henry Duelberg salvia. That's one that's near and dear to my heart. I love the plant, but I love the story. And I'm really kind of offended that Augusta is not a superstar. But one of the horticulturists in East Texas, he goes out and drives roads all the time. And if he sees plants in a cemetery or an old church or an abandoned house or out in the field, he'll stop and look at them. And if it's something that has not been classified or that he can't locate, they will end up studying it, and they will give it a name. And so they said, you're the one that found it, so you get to name it. And he found these in an old cemetery, and the headstone said, Henry Duelberg, Augusta Duelberg. Henry was blue, Augusta was white. And so, you know, I've always been told you need to plant Henry and Augusta together because that's how they grew. So, Henry is a great plant. Mystic Spires Blue Salvia, that's a great one for our area. Tangerine Beauty Crossvine, it grows well here. So if you need something to go up on a trellis or over something, that's a great plant. Blue Princess Verbena, Butterfly Vine, and Red Yucca. Now, I know when you say red yucca, most people go, oh, no, that couldn't be a superstar. It grows well, and when you go down Antley and you see all those red yuccas behind that fence at Fairway, they're stunning. So it finally made the cut to be a superstar. Okay, and then we also have some other plants. They're called perennials, and that's because they are tropical plants and they're perennials there. But when you grow them in other zones, they are annuals. So they're kind of a cross between a perennial or an annual, depending on where you're living and where you're planting them. And so I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will tell you some of the ones that, even though it says it may be an annual here, we've had really good luck. The Pride of Barbados, we planted one of those at Swinson House, oh gosh, several years ago, and it is gorgeous. It comes back every year. We also planted one in one of our trial gardens out on Maple Street. And it was not a very big one. It was a pretty new one. And it accidentally got weed-eated down to about like right there. And so it was one of those, well, we'll see how tough this plant really is. And I mean, it didn't take very long that it came out and it started re-leafing. So it survived a lot. The Gold Star Esperanza is also one that is considered a perennial. We have Esperanzas that have been in one of the demo gardens out here in front of the building for years. And these two keep coming back year after year. They're just stunning. Firebush has been grown here successfully. Some of these others have, you just have to realize that if you're buying one of these and planting it, it may be an annual or it may be a perennial, and you'll have it for several years. The woody shrubs, these are, they're perennials, but they're called, they're perennials because they come back year after year. But they're distinguished because of their size. They're not as tall and they're not as wide as a tree, so they're a woody shrub. And they can either be deciduous or they can be evergreen. And some of these are the Blue Angel Althea, the Lynn's Legacy. I always call that a Texas sage. You know, and it has the pretty purple flowers. And so that's now a superstar. And then we've got some roses. Belinda Stream Rose, Grandma's Yellow Rose, Knockout Rose, and Marie Daly Rose. I know there has been some problems there because of the rose rosette, and people have lost some roses. We think it's a Belinda Stream and a Grandma's Yellow out here that have been here probably since the building was built. And they have done well. And it may be because they're so old that they are immune to any kind of disease that comes through. But there are some roses that are superstars. My two favorites, I had to put them on a page by themselves. Rock Rose is really, really a great plant. The flowers are beautiful. They're very hardy. I've had even, gosh, I can't think how long I've had it, probably 15 years I've had some of them. And they just keep coming back, and beautiful, beautiful. And then the Texas Lilac Vitex is, we've got one out here too, also, but it's very hardy. You see them all over town. And when it says, it originally was the Texas Lilac, but they've added the other varieties of Vitex as superstars. I bought Shoals Creek several years ago, and it's just a smaller version. It says it gets up to about 4 feet tall, and that's about where mine is. You know, I keep telling it to grow a little bit more, but I'm fine with it. It's growing. And trees, these are the ones that have the single trunk, single stem. And they grow to a lot taller height, and they've got the branches that come out. So, of course, that's why they classify them as trees. The Basham's Party Pink Crepe Myrtle. That one is a really pretty crepe myrtle, and it's very, very hardy. And I know several people who have that one, and it lasted through the snowmageddon, the heat, the drought, and has done well. The deciduous holly, Shantung maple, and then we've got oaks, lacy oak, chinkapin oak, and then the Chinese pistache. There aren't very many trees that are superstars. And one of the reasons for that is it takes trees so long to grow. And if they're studying them, like say for 5 years, 10 years, these trees for the most part are still not going to be full-grown trees. And so it takes a lot longer to get them up and grown and see how they will perform. And then we have specialty plants. And that's just what they're called, specialty plants. It's just a hodgepodge of a lot of different things. The balsamic blooms basil, that is what we had in one of our rings this last year. It is stunning. I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. The Victoria red grape, Natchez blackberry. We've grown the green magic broccoli, the caricature plant, and then orchids. I mean, when you talk orchids, you're talking a house plant. You know, they would not survive a minute outside here in Abilene. And then the Satsuma mandarin, the Arctic frost Satsuma, and the orange frost Satsuma. These are orange trees. They are considered superstars, but not necessarily for our area, because, you know, citrus doesn't grow well here. We don't have the humidity, we don't have the rain, the heat, the wind, the drought, you know, it just is not conducive to it. However, I'm going to say you can still grow things like that in Abilene. You just have to give them more care and, for the most part, grow them in big pots or tubs, so when it starts getting really cold, you can move them in. We have a master gardener, and it's not a Satsuma. She wanted a lemon tree. And so she started it from a seed. And it's about like that. And it's in a pot, and so every time it's getting cold, it goes in the greenhouse. And then she'll take it back out, and she'll put it back in and out, in and out. If it's too windy, whatever the weather that's not perfect, it has to be cared for. And she came in one day with a lemon, and she said, I finally got a lemon. So she didn't care how much time it took her, how much work it was, how much money she spent babying it. She got what she wanted. And so that's what's important to you. The basket of fire pepper and the New Mix Twilight ornamental pepper and the purple flash peppers, they're gorgeous plants. They really make attractive things. I have had some in pots, and it's very striking. Barbecue skewers rosemary, that is a new rosemary, and it was named a superstar pretty quickly after they did the 2 or 3 year trial.
Do you eat those ornamental peppers, or are they just for beauty?
It depends on which variety you're talking about. It will tell you if they're edible or if they're poisonous. You know, I can't just answer the flat out, yes, you can eat all of them, because there are some that you really can't. But that's a good question, and you need to check on the label or online and see if a plant you're going to put out is poisonous. Because if you have a dog or a cat in your yard, you don't want to plant something that's going to be a problem there. Or kids. Festival strawberries, the celebrity tomato, we've all heard about celebrity tomatoes, and they named it a superstar. The dwarf cherry surprise, the tycoon is a relatively new one, and we had it for sale, I think, the year after it came out, and then it was named a superstar a year later. And water lilies. If you have a pond, you know, you can have water lilies. Now, it kind of at your own risk. You have to realize that there could be some issues. And so, I just have a few pictures here. I'm probably going to run out of time. I'm probably not going to show you. I just kind of, we're going to go to I'll show you how you can find information on every superstar. I think it's important to be able to know where to look. come to the end. See, those are the peppers that we were talking about. Some of these, I think, it was one of the ones we had in a ring out there, and we weren't sure what they were because they were untagged, so we couldn't sell them. Okay, and then the references that I have here, and they're listed, and I'm going to show you how to get to the Texas Superstar. If you Google Aggie horticulture, Danielle?
Oh, you want me to do that now?
Yes. Yeah, we'll go ahead and look at that and take care of some of the, I said they did 9 new superstars every year. In 2020, they named the tidal wave petunias, purslane pentas, blue days, and Mexican heather. So they named quite a few of new superstars in 2020. 2021, they did the celebrity tomato, rock rose, black stockings, Napier grass, and barbecue skewers, rosemary. And then in last year, they only named 2, and that was the tangerine beauty crossvine, the annual, and red yucca. So they haven't named any new ones this year. So we'll see what happens. So.
Sorry, I was trying to duplicate the display, so I'm going to have to do this.
Yes, I'll give that to you. Okay. And when you Google Aggie horticulture, this is the landing page. And this is so much fun. I spend a lot of time. I love to read. And then there's a whole section on Texas Superstars.
Want to go in it?
Mm-hmm. And the exciting thing about it, it's got a lot of reading information, but if you hit selecting superstars, no, let's go to Texas Superstar plants. I explained that enough.
Up here?
Mm-hmm.
Can't see it on my screen, so.
Okay, yes. So these are all the superstars, and they keep it up to date. So if they add a new one this year, it will go right on. The superstars, let's see, what was something that we need to look at? Oh, look at this balsam oak. It's on down here, a little bit lower, there. Okay, and then you can enlarge the picture.
This one?
Mm-hmm.
By clicking on it?
Yes.
Just because I can't read it.
Yes.
Okay.
See how gorgeous that is? It is so pretty. It's just striking. And so, and then you just click on. And you can tell it gives the exposure. It's really important if it's a sun plant, you don't want to put it in the shade. Now, sun in Texas, if it says full sun, it doesn't necessarily mean that it wants sun all day. I mean, we've got sun.
All day.
And then it gives the size and the plant type. This is an annual, and planting time, and then the soil type, and it says it has to be well drained. When you're looking at annuals, a lot of times they're not going to give you a zone for them because they're annuals. They're going to live for 1 year. And then suggested uses, and then special notes. So you can go back. Okay, and every one of these plants has a profile attached to it. So it really, really is good. So if you just go to Aggie Horticulture, it will give that to you, and I'll write out the address for you.
And the link is also on the website where y'all got the presentations. I put the link there too.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to look at? Just, your heart desired to look at one of these plants? Okay, let's go ahead and do the natives because I'm running out of time.
Do you know anything about drip rows? Do they do good here?
We have planted a couple of those at Swenson House several years ago, and they've done well.
Up there.
Huh?
There's two up in the.
Oh yeah, and there are 2 out there. And now the ones there's a huge difference. Out there, the soil has been amended a lot, and they have done really well. Out here, there right by the sidewalk, so it's got the ambient heat and the wind and full sun all the time. And that's going to make a difference in the performance of the plant. Okay, natives. Oh, native is my other favorite plant. And native doesn't mean, like I said, just, now I have to stop saying natives in a cactus and that kind of stuff. Since they named the yucca a superstar, you know, we've got to be positive about that. I love it though. Okay, why native and adaptive plants? And it's because they can make great landscapes. You can have them manicured, or you can just let them go wild, you know, be natural, and that's exciting. They're water efficient. You can use various structures, textures, colors, and it saves a lot of time and money because they are used to growing in this area and they have done it for years and years. Some of the benefits: they're environmentally sustainable, labor efficient. I'm going to stop here for just a minute. Kathy and I ran across a book, or it was kind of an article. It's called Two Ladies and a Hoe, H-O-E. Yeah. And it's talking about gardening in the second half of life, and which is really interesting because if you're spending all your time weeding and digging and everything, you're not enjoying it. And so they talk about how we should make things that are large enough that we enjoy them, but small enough we can manage them. So we have to remember to make whatever we're doing labor efficient. And they're drought tolerant, heat tolerant, water efficient, typically have low fertilizer requirements and low pesticide requirements. Now native plants, they have evolved. They have been here. They have thrived on our soils, and the nutrients or lack of in our soil. And they're more resistant to the pests we have because they've been around here for so long. They have immunity. And the adapted plants, they're very hardy, but they were brought from an area of the country here. And they had similar soil, they had similar environment, but they just didn't grow up here. And they work really well too. A native plant is not native to all parts of Texas. So you have to start, we've already talked this, start with the soil preparation. Make sure that you're ready to plant. And get a soil test. Plant the right plant in the right place and consider the spacing, the sun, the shade, the water requirements. When you're planting, make sure that you don't put something that needs a whole lot of water in with the ones that don't need much water, because it's very difficult to keep the water the correct ratio. Apply mulch around the plants, 2 to 4 inches of mulch, and then taper it off close to the base so that it doesn't cause the stem to rot. You know, when you have a tree, you don't ever do a volcano of the trunk. You make a donut. Mulch is good because of the water absorption, reduced water evaporation, weed control, soil temperature, lots of reasons. And then maintenance is the key to beautiful and a healthy landscape. So the rule of thirds is a third of drought-tolerant grass, which in our area is going to be things like St. Augustine, Bermuda especially, zoysia, and buffalo grass. A third native or adapted native plants or superstars, or whatever you want to plant, whatever makes you happy. And then a third of hardscape. And this is it's kind of one of those basic rules. I'm not going to go through all of these because of lack of time, but it'll be on the website. There was an article that came out a few years ago, and it gave a list of 100 plants that were good for Zone 8A. And I hung on to that, just because so many of these, I look at it and I go, oh, I've got red oaks. I didn't know that when I planted them 20 years ago. Desert willows are really good here. I was surprised. Have any of y'all grown Yopon holly? I imagine everybody has Yopon holly. And it had done really, really well. And then I think it was weakened during the snowmageddon. And then last year when it was so dry and so hot, I started having them die. And I thought, I went out there and I talk to plants all the time too. And I said, dude, you're a native plant. You can't die. And anyway, it did. So
it didn't help to talk.
It didn't help to talk to it.
Didn't listen, did it?
It didn't listen to me. But the East necklace is a good one. And you don't see it very often. We have one out here in our rain garden, Texas Mountain Laurel. And since plants are not, superstars or natives are not necessarily out right now, I brought our baby. We started some Texas laurels from seed. And so this is our baby little mountain laurel. Isn't that exciting? I know it's going to take 1,000,000 years for this to grow and be a good tree, but it's so exciting to see them come up. It's just like, oh, these are our children. And then the Vitex. You'll notice some similarities between superstars and natives. And then the turf grass. Palms, 8A for a palm is the East 8A, not the West 8A, because you know what happened to palms the last couple of years. Yuccas, there's the red yucca. And then perennials, lots of perennials on the native and adapted native list. And I know you can sit here and go, I planted that. Yeah. So it's great. Again, I'm not going to read all of them because it would take forever to read 100 of them, and then I'd want to tell a story about them. This dwarf Hamlin grass, I do want to say something about that. We had not seen that until just a few years ago, and we have 2 planted out in the bed with the rings, and the green is starting to come up, but they are gorgeous grasses. They don't get very tall, and just watching them blow in the wind was really fun this year. Abelias are fun. Okay, where are the native and adapted annual plants? There are none. If it's a native plant that's been around for years, it can't be something that lasts one season, reseeds. So there are no annual natives or adapted. And so always you can look for the plants in the database, see what grows wild, see what. If you're driving down the street and you see something you really like, this used to be a lot easier. You could stop and take a picture quickly, but everybody has a Ring doorbell and they kind of think you're there. They don't know what you're doing with the camera out in their front yard. So, be careful doing things like that. And then the references, there's A&M has information, the Native Plant Society of Texas, Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and Texas Smartscape. So those are really great references. There are 15 natives that everybody should have in their yard. I'm going to tell you what they are. I find it. If you want something to grow in shade or part shade, it's Turk's Cap, American Beautyberry, and Rock Rose. If you want something in full sun, it's Esperanza or Texas Sage.
What about the irises? I haven't heard you say anything about irises.
They are really not native.
They're not native?
They're not part of the natives. And then they've never been named a superstar. But they are great, and they've been around forever.
They grow fast. And
they do, and they're beautiful. I agree with you. Pollinators, Greg's Miss Flamacanthus and Mealy Blue Sage. If you want ground covers, broadfruit, or woolly stomodia. For fall, fall aster, inland sea oats, and Gulf muley, And for winter, the Yopon holly or the possum haw holly. And I'll put that list on too, so it'll be available. But, you know, there's just so much out there. It's just exciting. And a lot of us have some blank areas we need to refill this year because maybe they didn't make it through the heat and the drought last year, and they're not coming back. But I give every plant an opportunity to live. It may not look like it's living. I know they laugh at me. It may not look like it's going to come back, but it may. You know, it may come out. And my mesquite's not out yet. So I don't know if any of y'all have a mesquite. Yours is out? Mine's not out either. Yours is out? Well, you live a little further south, so you have a little more heat than I do. No, I don't know. But anyway, I kind of watch my mesquite. I'm an old timer, and when it looks like it's going to come out, you can't fool them very often. And so that's when I'll put out some of my tender plants. Yeah, I'll go ahead and put out some of the others now. Okay.